Good. All right, so as someone who one day plans to somehow be a combination of all four of these women up here, it is a really huge honor to be on stage with you all. I'm secretly, not so secretly, freaking out. This is so cool. I have to tell you a little short story. Last year at the Women in the World Summit, which is a summit that is put on by Tina Brown, and it used to be run by the Daily Beast, and it is kind of a model for our summit, or it was a model when Helen and I were thinking about how to create this day, and we actually stole a lot of the speakers from there. So last year I attended, and Nora O'Donnell was one of the speakers, and again, not so secretly, was like, oh, I love her, so I'm gonna go. I saw her walking out I had my eye on that the entire time. I was like, oh, I gotta meet her. And I saw her walking, bolting out, and no kidding, she doesn't know this, I ran to go say hi, to meet her, because I just have been so inspired by your work for so long. So it's really cool to be with you guys all today. So now I'll actually go into speaking about how awesome they are. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you our Rockstar Media panel, moderated by the wonderful Mary Jordan. Mary Jordan is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who has covered stories ranging from the White House to British politics to religious extremism in Pakistan. So cool. In 14 years abroad as a Washington Post foreign correspondent based in Tokyo, Mexico City, and London, she wrote from nearly 40 countries. She and her husband and colleague, Kevin Sullivan, won the 2003 Pulitzer Prize for International Reporting for their series on the Mexican justice system. They were 2009 Pulitzer Prize finalists for a series of stories about discrimination against women around the world. She's a graduate of Georgetown University, woo! One of our own, and an alum of Columbia University School of Journalism as well. Mary Jordan was also a Nieman Fellow at Harvard. She won a scholarship to study Irish poetry at Trinity College in Dublin and spent a year studying Spanish at Stanford. Wow, this is really impressive. She has taught journalism. I'm just really frank, sorry. It's one of my talents or weaknesses or strengths, whatever you see it as. She has taught journalism as an adjunct professor at Georgetown University and is a frequent contributor to BBC television. Now, then we have Nora O'Donnell, and she's the co-host of CBS This Morning, a position that she's held since July of 2012. Since joining the morning team, O'Donnell has had the opportunity to travel the globe covering major stories. She's an Emmy Award winner, and she joined the CBS News in June of 2011 as the network's chief White House correspondent. Nora currently serves as the primary substitute anchor for Face the Nation. She fills in as an anchor for CBS Evening News and reports for all the CBS News broadcasting platforms because she's that cool. Prior to joining CBS News, O'Donnell was the chief Washington correspondent for MSNBC and a contributing correspondent for NBC News Today and Weekend Today shows. She won an Emmy as part of NBC News' election night coverage. O'Donnell joined NBC News in 1999, and prior to that, she was a staff reporter for the Capitol Hill newspaper Roll Call and worked as a contributor and analyst for MSNBC. She's a firm believer in empowering women, and she sits on the board of directors for the International Women's Media Foundation. She's also a graduate of Georgetown University. Double Hoya here. She received a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy as well as a Master of Arts in Liberal Studies. Then we have Alex Wagner, and Alex Wagner is the host of MSNBC's Now with Alex Wagner. She had been an MSNBC analyst and a frequent MSNBC guest since 2010. Most recently, Wagner was a reporter with Huffington Post, where she covered innovation in the American economy, investigating the intersection of business, politics, and new technology. Prior to this, Wagner served as the White House correspondent for Politics Daily, where she chronicled a number of international and domestic affairs ranging from the BP oil spill to the Egyptian Revolution. Wagner was the executive director of Not on Our Watch, an advocacy and grant-making nonprofit, with the goal of stopping and preventing mass atrocities. Wagner traveled to troubled hotspots including Burma, Sudan, and Zimbabwe. From 2004 to 2007, she was editor-in-chief of the Fader magazine, covering cultural movements around the globe from Brazil to China to South Africa. And prior to this, she served as a cultural correspondent for the Washington, D.C.-based think tank, Center for American Progress. So she's had a lot of really interesting jobs. Wagner is a native of Washington, D.C., and she attended Brown.
Sorry.
It's okay. We still love you. It's fine. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Carolyn Ryan. And Carolyn Ryan is the Washington bureau chief of the New York Times. She previously worked at the Boston Globe and arrived at the Times in 2007. She quickly rose through the ranks, starting as deputy Metro editor for government and politics, and became the Metro editor in 2011. She helped lead the New York Times to a Pulitzer Prize for its coverage of the downfall of Eliot Spitzer. Carolyn was appointed political editor last May and was tapped to be the bureau chief barely 6 months later. Impressive. She has managed large reporting staffs in New York and Boston and is known inside the paper as a fierce competitor who sets high expectations. According to colleagues such as the Times reporter Nicholas Confessore, he's not here, so it's okay if I butcher his name. Carolyn has a transformative impact on our journalism and our careers. She sets extremely high standards, attempting to meet them, and then inevitably raises your game. Carolyn believes that an editor's job is to unleash talent by nurturing reporters and energizing them to produce their best work possible. She's a native of Massachusetts and went to Bates College. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to the fantastic Mary Jordan to start our media panel.
Well, I think we need a round of applause for that kind of energy. I am so happy about what's coming out of Georgetown these days. This is fantastic. We are all excited about being here, and there's nothing more rewarding than seeing really, really smart people that want to be in the media business. So we're going to, after you hear from us, you're all going to want to go in this field, because there is a lot of energy and a lot of different ways that you can do good things. So why don't we start? When we were talking with some of the students just now, they want to know what you're supposed to do when you leave Georgetown to get your jobs. Yeah. Or Brown, or Bates. So when you leave college, so what are the steps? And since Kendall just went through a lot of the different ways up, was there, Carolyn, do you want to start and just say something, maybe a key decision, or did you have your eyes on the prize of the New York Times?
I mean, the short answer is to be a maniac. Not in the sense of living in Maine, but when I got out of school, I was a maniac, and I immediately...
More precisely.
Yes, we actually have a video clip we're going to show. No, here's what I did. All right, the first thing, and this is going to sound over earnest and goofy, but I identified women in fields that I was really interested in, and I started calling and writing to them and asking them for advice. In fact, one of the ironies of my career, I ended up being Metro editor of the Boston Globe, and a woman on the staff pulled out a letter that I did not remember writing, but I had seen a story that I liked, and I had just, on my really goofy Bates College stationery when I was a senior, I had written her a letter about why I liked the story, and she had kept it. So I tried to meet as many people in the fields, men and women, but I was especially drawn to women who had done things. I ended up covering politics, so I really wanted to meet people who had done that. And I ended up, I'm from Massachusetts, and the kind of big employer, this is the summer of my senior year, I'd gone to Martha's Vineyard, but I ended up in my parents' house, and there was a factory in the next town, which, are you familiar with the chain Talbot's? It's like a preppy women's. So I was kind of low on cash, and Talbot's was hiring, and I was about to get this job, and my little brother, who is Georgetown Business School, he said, what about that stringing job? Because I was pushing for a stringing job at the Patriot Ledger, which was a good paper. And so I pushed there again, and they gave me an assignment. And when I was a maniac. Did you go to work at Talbot's? No, so I didn't take the Talbot's job.
You didn't take the Talbot's job.
Yeah, this is Anne Klein.
But you were talking about how close it was that you could have really been retail now.
Yes. So have a little brother who ends up at Georgetown. That's one of the things you should remember. But no, but and then when I was able to sort of get a tether into that paper, which was a really good paper at the time, I just was unrelenting. I would take assignments. I didn't know what I was doing. And when you look back on those clips, thank God they're not on the web. You know, it's a little stunning that they let me do it. But I think, you know, David Remnick, who's the editor of The New Yorker, talks about there, and you'll find this in your life, whatever you do, there are a ton of people who are really smart as you, gifted, had the same opportunities. What makes the difference, and I really noticed this at the places I work, what really makes the difference is drive, almost obsessive drive. And if you have that quality, employers tend to notice it, maybe exploit it a little, but you tend to get somewhere. So,
Nora, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I think persistence and tenacity and that drive is exactly, I mean, I was at Georgetown. I thought maybe I was interested in medicine. My parents are from that field. I thought maybe I was interested in law, so I got a job at a law firm. I thought maybe I was interested in journalism, so I got an internship at ABC News. I worked all throughout college and sort of dabbling to find out, you know, do I like this type of job? Do I like the type of people that are in this type of job? Does this really sort of interest me and pique my curiosity? When I graduated, when I was my senior year here at Georgetown, I got an internship at ABC News, and it was then ABC's This Week with David Brinkley. And one day they sent me down to the White House, and this was during the Clinton administration, early on in the Clinton administration. And so I was sitting in the booth with Britt Hume and Ann Compton, who covered the White House then for ABC News. And Ann Compton said, here's a notebook, and go in there, and if you have a question for President Clinton, just raise your hand. So I remember, you know, following in and standing in the back of the room, and the president coming out, and I remember this glow around him, thinking, you know, this is the coolest thing in the world that I'm in the White House. And of course, I was never going to raise my hand. I didn't have the confidence to do that. But then afterwards, Ann Compton said, how are you getting home? And I said, I was just, you know, going to take the bus or whatever. And she said, well, I have to pick up my son. I'll take you home. And we got in her station wagon. And she drove me home and said, you know, get a Rolodex, keep everybody's name, keep their numbers, and call them and ask for a job. So I think finding a woman, just as Caroline said, that you can connect with and be your mentor and that you can go back and ask advice from is incredibly important. And to this day, when I left NBC after 12 years to go to CBS, I called Ann Compton and asked her what she thought. She was my last person I called as a touchstone. So having that. On the persistence note, after I graduated from Georgetown, I worked at a publication called The Hotline, which was one of the original aggregators of news even before the Huffington Post. And then I wanted to get a job at Roll Call as a print reporter covering politics. So at the time, the editor of Roll Call was a woman named Susan Glasser, who is a noted reporter, married to Peter Baker of the New York Times and is now with Politico. And so she was editing, and she said, great, why don't you write a piece for me on Patrick Kennedy, who was then a young congressman who was going to become grooming him. They were going to make him the head of the DCCC, which raises money for Democratic candidates. So she said, go write a profile of him. So I spent 2 weeks every night staying up late, writing this and talking to people and trying to write this great profile. So I wrote the profile. They published it on the front page. And I never got paid for it. And but I called Susan up afterwards, and I said, you know, can I come in for an interview? So I had an interview. I showed up at Roll Call for my interview, and hi, I'm here. I have an interview with Susan Glasser. And they were like, oh, she's not here today. And I said, oh, but I have a job interview. And they said, oh, she's out sick today. And I said, but nobody called me. And they're like, so? So I said, so what should I do? And they were like, just come back another time. So I marched out of there and thought, well, I'm going to call her every day until she returns my phone calls and schedules an appointment with me. Because it wasn't personal. She was sick that she missed that appointment. My work was great. She's busy. Everybody is extremely busy. And so I called her and called her and called her. And then she finally said, oh, yeah, that piece was great. Come on in. And then I got the job. So that idea about persistence is being incredibly important.
And Alex, how about you?
Well, when I graduated from Georgetown, I'm actually looking forward to that day, Hoyas. I mean, I think we all have the maniac, sort of tenacious maniacs, right? That seems to be the running theme here. When I graduated from Brown, I knew I wanted to be in journalism and media, and I was out in Los Angeles with my dad on spring break, which gives you an insight into how popular I was in college. And we were in LA, and I was like, this place is great. I'm not moving to New York. I'm moving to LA, and I'm going to work for a magazine in Los Angeles. And my dad was like, okay, what magazines are in Los Angeles? And I was like, I'm going to work on that part. And I remember going to the newsstand and looking at all the magazines that I thought were cool and interesting and picking them up one by one and looking at the mastheads. And finally, I found 2 magazines that were printed in Los Angeles, and they were cool. One of them was called Ray Gun, and one of them was called Bikini. They no longer exist, but they were very cool back in the day, I assure you. And I looked at the phone number. No, I remember this is pre-cell phone days. I called information 411 at a payphone on the side of the street in Los Angeles, got the number for the offices for Bikini and Ray Gun, called them and said, my name is Alex Wagner. I am interested in becoming an intern and getting an editorial position at your magazine. I'm here on spring break for the next few days. I'd like to have a meeting. And they kind of were like, who the hell is this? But, you know, if you're ballsy enough, I mean, and you can be as a woman, obviously, you know, just doing it and not worrying about the details is, I think, probably the best advice I can give. And sure enough, I went in there, and the editors were kind of sort of like, we don't have an editorial position. And I said, oh, but you will, I'm sure. After a few months, I'm sure something will open up. And I went and became an intern. I moved out to Los Angeles. I was an intern, and I became an editor in like 4 or 5 months later, which was, you know, obviously the heavens were working in my favor, but it's also because I just, you know, if you will it, if you build it, they will come. I mean, to a certain degree. I would also say, in terms of like the advice, the deliverable advice I would give you guys, I don't know what it is like to try and look for a job in the digital age. And I would say, as someone who exists now in the digital age, I cannot underscore how important it is to pick up the telephone, to make calls, to write notes, to kind of participate in old school forms of communication. That is evidence, as much as anything else, that you really want something. It takes effort to write letters. It takes courage to pick up the phone. It's all super important in this day and age. Much more, I mean, emails are important too, but for your first job, it's a marker of how tenacious someone is to communicate like that.
And when I started, it was actually some men who were helping me, but Marty Gottlieb was a city editor at the New York Times, and I was at Columbia Journalism School, and he said, you know, you're really interested in government. I was a Georgetown government major. You should come along with me to the mayor's conference, because I have to cover him for work. So my teacher was covering Ed Koch, who was running the city of New York. And so I was standing beside him, and I thought, well, my teacher's right there. I really should ask a question. But there were about 70 reporters in City Hall. So I raised my hand thinking that the teacher would be impressed, but Koch called on me. And so then he was talking that day, a big diagram about 13 new incinerators that were opening in New York. And I was like, well, what do you say to the people that live right beside? Well, Mr. Mayor, what do you say to the people that live right beside these incinerators? They're not too happy. And then he goes, why don't you come up here? Just come on up here. And you come on up here to the mic, and why don't you tell the city of New York what you're going to do with their trash?
Wow.
And I stood there, and I started getting redder and redder and redder and redder. And then I stood my ground, and I said, too bad you were elected.
Nice. Awesome.
But I guess I bring it up because there have been a lot of uncomfortable moments from that time on, and you do have to stand your ground, and you never are rude to anybody. You know, I think that's another key thing in media is that I have found, because I've always been in the news business long enough, that time and time again, you run into somebody in Waco, Texas, or it's some disaster you're at, and then 10 years later, they help you because now they're in the government, and they're, oh, you were so nice to me at this thing. You can't underestimate being really nice to people along the way. And if you just act, I always think of myself, whenever you're a journalist, you should act like 60 Minutes reporters behind you filming everything you do, and you will always act behind the scenes as though you were on the TV screen. But let's come back to our fabulous panel here and talk about, was there one particular obstacle? You're all rock stars now, but was there one thing that shyness or, I don't know, like some obstacle that you had to overcome in order to really nail the job that you're doing? What's the hardest part, maybe? Carolyn?
I do think that, in my observation, at least in newspapers, a lot of people who end up being reporters or journalists are sort of shy, and they want to participate in the process, and a notebook kind of gives them entry that they wouldn't ordinarily have. I was raised in a lovely Irish Catholic family outside of Boston, and my folks were really interested in politics, and they loved newspapers. But they also, they liked the idea of me being a pleasant, likable person. And, sometimes in journalism, you upset people. And I think, at least for me, that was a little bit of getting accustomed to the criticism that comes with journalism. I do think it's a lot more ferocious now for reporters. We just live in a more contentious age. So I sometimes remember this quote that Eleanor Roosevelt offered, which was that if you're a woman in public life, you have to develop, she called her a rhinoceros hide, that you have to have a very thick skin, and you have to understand, as Nora said about the interview, so much of this is not personal. But I do notice with women coming into the field, even nowadays, there's a little bit of discomfort with taking on sort of that authority position and kind of deflecting and absorbing the criticism that comes with that.
What's some of the harder things that about your job?
Every day is a challenge, Mary. I don't know. It's it's like, how do I pick one? There were so. I mean, I think what you're touching on, Carolyn, the self-doubt thing. First of all, and I will say this, and I won't speak broadly for people in TV. My concern about being a TV personality is, I think, because you have to develop a rhinoceros skin, and you have, especially in the 21st century, you have the Twitter sphere, MSNBC has its own share of lovers and haters. You do have to develop a sort of, a battle suit. You have to put it on every day. And there is a danger in doing that you kind of lose sight of yourself, I think, a little bit. And negotiating that tension, I think, has always been a challenge for me, and also making sure I don't turn into a monster, because it's very easy, actually, to turn into a monster the more successful you get, and you sort of lose sight of the things that matter and the people that matter, and why you are a human being to begin with.
How do you do that, actually, when you have, both of you, when you have all these fans that just send you all this adoring...
Or people that do not send you adoring emails. I mean, there are plenty of those people, too.
But how do you still remain normal and not, get the rock star head?
I mean, I'll answer for myself. I feel like I am surrounded by a group of people that I work with who are immensely talented, far more so than I, and are very generous and kind, and we treat each other with equal amounts of respect. My executive producer is a woman and is sitting right over there in the jean jacket. And then, I have an incredible fiance who's like deeply caring and loving and a great family. And I have friends that do not watch MSNBC or anything that I do and could care less about what it is that happened. And that actually is a very good reality check, because you just, you're a normal person when you're with them.
And her fiance, Sam Cass, from the White House, is right here, yes. Too. Nice of you to come by. So, Nora, behind every great woman, there's
behind every great man. Anyway.
There's a great,
I guess I would say, truly, and this is something I think about a lot, is, and to go back to Eleanor Roosevelt, you must do what you cannot do. And I think there is... I think the hardest thing now is struggling with your self-doubt and overcoming that. And I also think when you encounter people who are either resisting an idea, and I say that, I'm talking about internally with your career. So as you move up in your career, you will find mentors, and then you will find people who don't support you in a certain way, or who are not of the same mindset as you. And I mean that to say, as women, you will encounter in your career men who are not supportive of other women. And let me just give you an example. What I'm saying is, when I was at NBC for 12 years, I had 3 kids in 13 months. Because my husband, who I met at Georgetown, said to a bunch of graduating seniors, he said, I had 3 kids in 13 months, all with the same woman.
She has twins.
I have twins, yes. You're like, how did that work? Wait, I took biology class. So anyway, I had 3
For the
kids.
mathematicians out there, I was just, okay.
I had 3 kids all in a successive amount of time, and Tim Russert was the most fabulous boss in the world in a great environment. When I was looking to make a move, I interviewed with some people, and a man, a very prominent man, and this is like not long ago, said to me, do you really think you could do this high-profile job with 3 young kids at home? And I said, do you ask that question of men? And he said, yes, I do. And I got so steamed. And I went out and I called my husband. I said, this guy just asked me if I could do this job because I have 3 young kids at home. And he said, well, 1, that guy's a jerk. 2, it's totally illegal to ask that question. As an employer, my husband employs people, he owns restaurants. And then he said, 3, but you can't let it bother you. And you just got to move on from it. And it shouldn't affect whether you, that position that you're considering, like shouldn't affect what you want to do in life, and don't ever think twice about it. It just happens that that person was a jerk and said that. So I point that out because I do think it's important. I do think, and this has come up in this current debate about, we have so many smart women. You know, we have been going to college at the same rate as men for 30 years. Since 1982, we've gotten 10 million more college degrees than men. We're getting more PhDs, we're getting more masters. Ladies, we took the sledgehammer to the educational glass ceiling a long time ago. And so the question is why we don't have more women in leadership roles. And it's a little bit of, I think this, and people are talking about ambition gaps, self-doubt, the confidence gap, all of these certain things. And I share that story with you because it's one we all face. And there's, you know, the things sometimes that people in 2014 say to me blow me away, you know, in 2014. And I think I just share that just to say, don't get your back up about it. Move on and keep doing your job and exactly what you want to do. And that's what I try and do personally.
When my husband and I were posted as the co-bureau chiefs in Tokyo, and there was a front page story in the biggest newspaper in the world, the newspaper out of Tokyo, that how weird is this, that this husband and wife with kids are working together running the bureau. And the whole line of questioning was to me, not to him, about the kids. And I said, well, why don't you ask him? I kept saying, why don't you ask him? And he said, but where are your kids? Like, right now, like, who is with your kids? like, you know, and like over and over and over again. And finally, I said to the translator, I said, just tell him I left them in the oven. And then the very proper Japanese men said, I don't think I should do that. I really don't think I should do that. But it was always, always, always to me and never to him. And I think it's a really good point that it still persists today. But that leads us to something about there are some women that do want the word balance is just, nobody's using it anymore. It's like your priorities and how you deal with it, and every day is kind of different. But when you talk, maybe quality of life is what we want to talk about. You know, there is this element where you have to be a maniac and work all the time. And given your opportunities, and unfortunately, a lot of the opportunities come right at the same time that personal life interferes or comes. So how do you deal with this so-called quality of life?
Well, I'll start. One of the things that happened to me was that I worked really hard through my 20s and worked 7 days a week I was a reporter at Roll Call and then worked for MSNBC on the weekends. When I worked at NBC News, I actually negotiated in my contract a 6th day of work so that I could actually get paid for it, which is really interesting. I actually, in fact, when Tim was like, well, you can't do weekend nightly news because then you're working 5 days a week. And I said, no, I actually worked it out in my contract. I'd get paid for a 6th day. He was like, really? I'm like, yeah, I did. He's like, okay, fine. You can work on Saturday and do the weekend nightly news. So the nice thing about building up that is that when I did go to have kids, I had so much, I had relative amount of experience, but I think I had enough where I'd done a lot of campaigns. I'd traveled a lot all over the world with secretaries and presidents, so I had some seniority that was helpful at that point. And then I do think that you have to have a helpful spouse, and I think there's kind of this, I think there's a reluctance for women to talk about that they have a nanny at home, that for some reason that's bad to say that you have a nanny. But, you know, husbands have wives who don't work, or there are plenty of 2-couple parents and one doesn't work, all different kinds of, you know, family structures. You know, be a CEO of your house. Just like you would put at work people around you to do great work, have people at home who can help you do a great job. I found out I was pregnant with twins. I started interviewing when I was 3 months pregnant and found a woman named Alba, who is still with me to this day, is the most important person in my life, other than, my husband and my kids, but she's part of my family because I cannot do what I do without her. And, you build a support system at work, people who support you and do a great job. Build a great support system at home. You have it growing up with your parents, who are your support system, and build that throughout your life.
And is it hard to have a boyfriend in another city, Alex? I only said that because Sam is right there.
Yeah, no, it's not. I mean, the good thing about Washington and New York is they're not far away, and I think you just make choices, right? I mean, I will say, I think your 20s, and you guys are all in them or going into them. I mean, it is about the hustle. I mean, unapologetically, like, it is about working your tail off. I mean, it just is. It is, and you're gonna have to make hard choices along the way at some point, but if you can sort of reconcile at the beginning the fact that you are not gonna have as much time as you wanna have, then it's a little bit more livable, and you will eventually get to a place where you will have more time. But I guess I have been a little bit unflinching in sort of acknowledging that. It sucks sometimes, but it's all in service of a greater good, and there's a period in your life where you work really super hard, and then you're set up for another part of your life. Can you have high quality of life and be at the top of your game at work?
It depends, what you consider quality of life, right? I mean, it's difficult. I mean, one thing I do observe, I guess, at least in my, for example, my father died 5 weeks ago.
Oh,
And my mother, my dad was one of those husbands who was just very devoted, and my mother had Alzheimer's. He was caring for her at home. As soon as the Times heard that my father had died, it was just, go be with your family, don't think about work, and, don't think about the time, and I do think, the Times is overseen by a woman now. I do think in the last 10 to 15 years, what I've noticed is that even in a relentless profession like journalism, that there's a little bit of, and maybe it's because we've been through some rough times, but there's a little bit more humanity that's just a part of the way places are run. And so whether it's dealing with kids or, extending leaves, I just think that, and again, maybe it was the recession that sort of made us question our values and think more about life. But I do think in the last decade, even in places that are hyper-demanding and unending in terms of responsibilities, that there is more latitude for life. That's my observation.
Alex just brought something up that I just want to talk about hard work. I think when I'm talking to some kids who are 17, 18, 19, 20, they see the media and they think it's so fun. Oh my gosh, you got to go and talk to Paul McCartney today. What a blast. Or, all these interesting people, which is really true. It's really interesting. We all day long get to meet, who's ever in the news we're talking to. And somehow that sometimes makes it seem like it's easy. And I just want to talk about the hard part of this and just the hours. And I remember Tim Healy, who was the president of Georgetown, and I was lucky enough to take his class. He was a terrific writer. And he said, okay, you want to write? You want to see how many times I wrote this speech? And he brought me into his office up in the Healy building. And he had first draft, second drafts, all longhand, and 9 different drafts, and it's still not done. And he was one of the best writers going. So just to tell people that even it can be fun and really satisfying and super interesting and not a job as a bank teller, but there's still a lot of work behind it.
Well, I think, it's interesting, my father's in his 70s and he's still working. I say, Dad, why don't you retire? And he said, because it's my identity. And I thought it's made me think about, your work does become your identity. And people work really hard because we love it. We love what we do. And the great thing about journalism is that it's a front row seat to history. And you know, you interact with people who are newsmakers, who are who have amazing acts of courage when there's terrorism or whatever, or natural disasters, and you're constantly amazed by the great human spirit or people who do amazing things. And that's what journalism, I think, is what because I'm endlessly curious about people and what they do. The question, I guess, was kind of about,
what time do you get up in the morning? That's what I want to know. I mean, there is work that goes behind it, right? You're the face of morning TV now.
You know, you get used to no sleep. You actually do. I used to love sleep. I used to miss classes sometimes in the morning at Georgetown because I'm a big sleeper. But now I get up. Yeah! See? I turned out okay.
But what time do you get up? I'm just kind of
I get up at 4. I get up at 4.
And what time do you try to go to bed?
I try to go to bed at like 9, but then I end up, you know, reading usually for a while. So, but you know, I mean to say this is that you work on, you love your life and your job, and if you keep thinking that you have to balance something, then you drive, especially if you're
right.
Irish and you grew up Catholic, then you just feel guilty all the time. You know, do what you do. You know, do what you do at work and do what you do at home, and then be in the moment at those times. But working hard, there's a joy in that. There's a joy in being successful in what you love. And I'll let you, when I was talking about that educational glass ceiling that we took a sledgehammer to, Sheryl Sandberg, who I interviewed for 60 Minutes, has made this analogy, which is that because we have the same educational level as men, if not surpassed them, it's like a professional marathon, right? So we all get up to the starting line at this marathon, and we start running this marathon, men and women. And men, everybody cheers from the sidelines, go to the top, go to the top. And women start running, and as soon as we start running, say, wait, aren't you gonna have kids? You know, and how are you gonna balance it all? You know? And then we finally get, to mile 24, and somebody says, but can you really have it all? It's this women are faced with it. We're constantly, how do you balance it? How do you deal with the kids? How do you deal with your personal life? And it's a standard that we're asked to judge, and then you start thinking about it. And so that's why I've said I'm not a fan of the phrase, balance work and family. So we've got to find a way to move beyond that debate and really embrace the careers that we love.
Right. Is it any different at work for either of you that you're a woman? Does it play into your work at all? And
I think I had never conducted myself thinking particularly about my gender, but it's become clear that it is an issue. I mean, that it's something, I recognize that people are treated differently and the conversations are different. And, Nora touched on this. I think the way to deal with misogyny or any kind of prejudice generally is to kind of address it insofar as it needs to be addressed, but then move on. And also, I think in all kind of challenges in life, to be able to handle it with a certain amount of humor and grace is and especially humor. I think sometimes women, we feel like so much is on our shoulders and there's so much shouting from the sidelines. To be able to laugh at some of the absurdities is incredibly important. And it's something I think we need to constantly remind ourselves about.
So one observation I would make is I have had a bunch of jobs where I'm kind of leading a big staff. And I do feel like one difference, and it's not something that stops me in any way or impedes me, I do think that women in those jobs, there tends to be more evaluation, especially among the staff, interesting, in observation of their emotions and personality in a way, as you're sort of, carrying out orders or asking them to do things. I feel like the lens through which women as leaders tends to be viewed is still sort of more emotional and personality driven. That feels like a vestige of an earlier era. But in terms of the actual journalism, part of the reason I got into journalism, and this may sound naive, is I felt like it was such a concrete product. If I delivered a story, no one would know, it didn't matter, that it came from a girl, it was just, it was a very pure thing they could assess. Did I get, the best quotes? Did I have a scoop? And it felt like something that would be a very kind of pure product that would be separated from who I was.
I'm really curious how you've dealt with that because, someone sort of told me you got to use the sandwich method, which is that say something positive first, then make what is, the appropriate criticism, and then the nice thing at the end. And you might say, why can't I just speak plainly about what needs to be done? Both men and women should employ this, but I think it's particularly true to women. And there are books written about this. If you've ever read, How to Win Friends and Influence People, when you criticize or need to get something done, the way in which you do it is particularly important. And I think women get judged on a different standard about how they carry out those directions or instructions. So I'm curious, as you as an editor, how you do that as a leader. Do you think about?
Yeah, I think I probably overthink it a little bit, but a lot of times what I've started doing is at the end of a conversation like that, I will ask them to say, what do you hear me saying to you? And ask them to kind of come back and recite it, because a lot of times what I find is, because you end up couching it in such, kind of almost maternal words sometimes, that your actual message, which is pretty direct, like
the sandwich part, the middle part, right?
You have to file your story on time. It gets totally lost in your attempt to be, kind and supportive and nurturing, and yet have high standards. Sometimes, making sure that the message itself has gotten across, in allowing that, some of this is going to persist no matter what we do.
Well, I find just with the television part is that when you're on TV, the people always comment on what women are wearing. I'm sure this is women in public office find this too, but very rarely like Charlie Rose, I don't know what he wears. Right, with you, he's not.
Improvement. I hope that's awesome.
Where's Kara Swisher when we need a tweet? There. Okay.
He knows.
No, but it is, how do you deal with the public? The public expects you not just to be bright, and not just to maybe say something in a softer way along with the sledgehammer, but also to look good, to brush your hair. The guys don't even have to brush their hair, I feel like. Is that just the way it is?
Oh, sure. I think there's a different standard, but I think I think the idea is always to be professional and not distract from what you want people to concentrate on, which is substance. It's not, you want people to focus on the substance of what you're saying and the news you're delivering. I'm in a business, we're on television, so we do dress and do our hair and wear a lot of makeup. That's part of, hopefully don't wear too much makeup, but we do. That's part of the medium, but I hope that people are focused too on the content of what we're saying.
And older guys seem to do well on TV, whereas it's also harder for women. I just think this is one of the ceilings that we're still.
Maybe this is a perverse sign of progress, but I feel like there is a lot of criticism of men and their appearance these days.
Yeah.
Whether they're on TV or not, there's just a lot more evaluation of.
We're becoming shallower across the board.
That's great. We're gonna go to the audience now for some questions to our powerhouse panel here. Are there mics somewhere? Oh, there we go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Wolfram. Thank you all for being here today. So you touched on having a rhinoceros skin when you're out there in the field, and definitely one of the things that's most terrifying for women leaders is just kind of the fear of being called the B words, bossy being the new it word right now. And my personal least favorite thing I hear is if a woman ever shows, a little bit of emotion or frustration, oh, she's PMSing. She must be PMSing. How? Those things really frustrate me. But what are some suggestions that you give young women leaders, ways to kind of respond to that and respond to those criticisms and respond to those words that we constantly are being called or phrases that we are being, or that are being pinned on us?
Don't perpetuate them yourselves amongst other women, I think, first. One, don't let the criticism bother you. Employ different words. I have two girls, two daughters. I have a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old, and my 6-year-old Grace, we were having a birthday party, and she was telling everyone, now you sit here, and here's you get this cupcake. And I turned to my friend Beth, who's a lawyer here in Washington. This is a couple years ago, and I said, oh, gee, sorry. And she said, oh, no, Grace has such executive leadership skills.
That's great.
So when I told Sheryl Sandberg that story, that actually helped me get the interview with Sheryl Sandberg. But then when that phrase has now been reused, I called up my friend Beth and I said, hey, I just want you to know Sheryl Sandberg is using this story. And she said, well, Nora, of course Grace has executive leadership skills. She was just using cupcake management skills. So, but it's a funny story, but I think about it all the time when my daughter does things and that what they're executive leadership skills. They're not being bossy, you know, so I think we also have to change our thinking about, on a daily basis, about when girls speak up. Also the word ambitious, you know, she's so ambitious, you know. How about she's so assertive and determined? And role model those people in your own conversations with other women about.
I mean, I would also say, screw them. Like whatever. You know, people are gonna, like, people think you're bossy. So what? Like, just move on. You know, like, those are the people, those are not the people you need to worry about. You need to worry about you. And, like, the best way to do that is to shut out the hateration. I mean, really, to be slang about it, but, like, I mean, I agree, like, in terms of, you know, where we are as a society and in terms of actually being a woman leader, like, these words are corrosive and insidious. But as the person that is being called them, just don't listen. Move on. You know? That's also how you develop that rhinoceros skin.
And I think that what Carolyn and Alex and Nora, at the end of the day, it's because they're really smart and they work hard and they're good at what they do and they know it and you know it and you can just, it's easier to kind of shut out the haters and the people that really don't know. I mean, I think that a lot of this is kind of an inner peace about, you know, that you're adding to and not subtracting from the world, your immediate world at work, and then hopefully, and I think one of the reasons I went into journalism in the media is because I feel like you can actually do some good. Good journalism is good information and you know, adding to people's understanding. And then if you have that kind of fire or the drive that Carolyn was talking about, you know, you can get up at 4 in the morning and you can kind of do good things and you can shut out the people that you need to shut out.
Oh, there we go. I'm Kendall, and I'm going to take the opportunity to ask a question. So my question is specifically for Nora and Alex. As being on TV and being broadcast journalists, how did you guys find your way onto TV? Really, because oftentimes a lot of the jobs that are available in journalism, especially in broadcast, are production assistant jobs. Do you think that is that the route to go? I know that I believe, Nora, you started in print at Roll Call, so how did you find your way on to TV? You know,
my own, and it is interesting that we both came from print, and I would recommend that because I think, I think you should establish skills of being a great reporter and being a great writer, and writing a story for a newspaper is much different than writing for television, where you write to sound bites in a different way. It's a different kind of format. Both are very challenging. But I think the core is substance. The core is substance and skill. And you have to be a great reporter. And I think it's a good, unfortunately, I think entry-level jobs in television focus more on production. And I think if you want to be a great reporter, be a great reporter. And, there's so many great still papers and digital places where you can get an entry-level job writing. I mean, I think even in Washington about all the publications that cover policy issues on the Hill. To me, it's just an open door to learning about how government works. And for me, for Roll Call, covering Capitol Hill, which is, you get to bump into congressmen and senators in elevators and ask them questions. It's just a great way to learn policy and become knowledgeable very quickly.
Yeah, I started doing MSNBC when I was covering the White House for Politics Daily, which was part of AOL, and then got sort of upstreamed into the Huffington Post. But my friend Chris Hayes was guest hosting a show. We'd known each other for a long time. He said, do you want to come play TV with me tonight? And I did, and then I started making appearances on MSNBC. But I totally agree with Nora's comments that being a journalist and sort of developing that muscle memory is really a good place to start.
Thank you all so much for being here. You're incredibly inspirational. I wanted to ask you all, since you cover politics and know Washington really well, the recent government shutdown that we had, we really saw our way through that ultimately because of women's leadership in the Senate. And I'm wondering if you think that this is signs of good things to come for Washington, and if it does in fact address the idea that women do lead differently, and how so?
I do think that there are signs, especially in the Senate, that that women are not only leading differently, but are kind of teaming up in really interesting ways. I don't think the women in the Senate lack any of the ambition, of their male counterparts, but I do think they've taken leadership. One issue that I'm kind of fascinated by, there's been an attempt to do something about sexual assault in the military because the system is really broken. And you have a very young senator, young by Washington standards, Kirsten Gillibrand, and then you have Claire McCaskill, who is a former prosecutor, and they're both coming at this issue from their own perspective, but like in a very grounded and serious perspective. And one thing that I've been so interested to see in terms of that issue, there was a flurry of stories initially about the fact that women were leading the charge. But since then, it feels like there's just been a substantive focus on the possible ways of fixing a broken system. So that felt like, for me, a very hopeful and kind of promising reality in the Senate.
I think we only have time for this last bit of advice to the students. So if you're young and you're just starting out your work career, do you have any last bit of advice to them?
I mean, I would just say be unafraid. It's scary. Leaving college is scary. I remember just wanting to stay and thinking, like, do I really have to give up my dorm room? Really? And it wasn't even that nice a dorm room. It's scary, but the world out there is like, it's an exhilarating time. A lot of stuff is changing, and it's like, tectonic shifts in media especially. And that's scary to, I think, a lot of people, but for your generation in particular, you are resilient, you have grown up in a time of change, and you are so well positioned to take advantage of this moment. And, put on your shoes, high heels or not, whatever they are, and, march forward. It's a great time to be graduating.
I guess I would say, when I was 21 years old, I came to Washington and I met with 3 women who were doing journalism: Mary McGrory, Margaret Warner, and Eleanor Randolph. And Eleanor Randolph, to me, was like this Mary Tyler Moore figure. She was covering media at the Washington Post, and she just had this kind of way about her that was so winning. And she said one thing to me, which was, don't think that you have to change your personality to be a journalist. And I think a lot of women, and young people generally, think they have to be like a Sam Donaldson, like almost like a caricature of an aggressive journalist. I really retain that because there are all kinds of personalities that really thrive in journalism. And then lastly, just a little bit of life advice, and this is an echo of what others have said, but be kind. Especially in your 20s, early 30s, there's a lot of competition, and you can sometimes bump up against people, but it's really important for like a lasting and happy career in life to be kind.
Nora?
Yeah, I would say there's 2 things. I would say, clarity of purpose and, think deeply about what you want to do. And you don't have to know. And if you don't know, try, a year at this job and a year at this job, or use your opportunity when you're in college to have those internships to find out what you really want to do. And then, clarity of purpose. I think it really helps to move up the ladder if you say, I want to be a White House correspondent. I want to be bureau chief. I want to be an editor. I want to be a member of Congress. I want to be, and think about on that, or eventually where you want to be. And there'll be times in your career where that will change. I didn't ever think that I was going to anchor a morning show in New York. That was never, I'd planned to just continue covering politics in Washington. So things change. But I think clarity of purpose about where you want to go, and then communicating that with the people around you can help you move up the ladder. And on the note about being kind, too, and having gratitude, if you go into journalism, I think, and this is true, quite frankly, of any field, remember that most people are really good people, you know? And despite what your own personal beliefs may be, most people are good people. They may not communicate well, or you might not have a great first interaction, but most people are really good people and want to do well. And if you have a bad first encounter with them, make an opportunity to have a second encounter, and you're going to uncover great things about that someone. Never let that sort of get in the way of your success. And I say that because someone just asked me recently about what's the difference between covering Republican and Democratic White Houses, you know, and I said, honestly, the same is that these are really good people who go into public service, who work in administrations, you know, and you see the media, we ask them tough questions from the front row. But I have deep, deep respect for, you know, not only the presidents who serve and others, but the people who work behind the scenes. And if you ever get the opportunity to work, you know, in politics too, I think it's such a noble profession. Even though you see us ask them very, very tough questions, I respect them. I respect them because it's tough work. And I hope that if we show more of that respect too, we'll have a little bit less of the dysfunction that's happened in Washington.
I remember when I was a senior at Georgetown, it was the most frightening time because I loved school, and my parents thought there were two jobs, a doctor and a lawyer. And I knew I couldn't be a doctor, and I didn't want to take the LSATs. And so I mean, it was very, very hard the last weeks of school. And so if anybody's out there in that position, I think what helped was I thought, okay, well, I really want to do what I'm kind of good at. You know, I remember Bill Clinton said that he liked to play the trombone, was it saxophone, but he realized he couldn't be the best in the world playing the saxophone, so he decided to do something else. But I knew I couldn't be a doctor. I wouldn't be a good doctor. And so just think about what you would be good at, because there is enormous satisfaction in doing something well, and then just throw yourself at it. So if you can write, and by the way, even if you can write, doesn't mean it has to be easy to write. You know, I mean, you might have the ability out there, but don't think, oh, well, it's easy. It always used to annoy me, especially when I started at the Post. I was only 23, and the guy next to me seemed to me he could write equal quality in a lot less time. That's super annoying. But just stay at it, and if you're good at something, throw yourself at it, and you'll find great satisfaction. Thank you.